ultra-processed foods in the UK and the US are being linked to around 14% of early deaths. And when you compare those figures with countries with lower daily calorie consumption of ultra-processed foods, that's linked to 4% of premature deaths.
Some studies suggest that ultra-processed foods can affect hormones that control our sense of fullness.
Hey, it's Hannah here, and this is What in the World, your podcast for the stories that get people talking from the BBC World Service. What have you had to eat today? Maybe it was a cereal bar, a packet of crisps, chocolate biscuit, sandwich from a supermarket, or a fizzy drink with your lunch. We all eat foods like this, ultra-processed foods, from time to time. In fact, globally, they're making up more and more of our diets. And in the UK and the US, they account for half of the calories that we eat. Now, experts are warning that they could become a global health threat. So in this episode, you're going to hear what ultra-processed foods are, how to spot them, and how bad they really are for us. Here in the studio with me is our BBC Health reporter, Annabelle Rackham. Hey, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So first of all, what actually counts as an ultra-processed food? How can we tell?
The best way to think about ultra-processed foods are things that contain 5 or more ingredients and things that you wouldn't find in your average kitchen. So if you're looking at a product, you turn it over, you look at the ingredients list, it's going to have things on there like emulsifiers, preservatives, additives, dyes and sweeteners. And some of the best examples of that are things like ready meals, crisps, fizzy drinks.
I'm thinking of all the sauces in my fridge as well. They probably have.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the most fun game to play at home if you want to go home tonight and just have a look in your fridge. But that's an easy way to spot them.
Talking of games, I've got a quick game for you, OK? We are going to play a game of true or false. First up, Annabelle, fizzy drinks. Are they ultra-processed?
True. They are ultra-processed. I would not encourage going home and trying to make a cola drink or a lemonade at home. I don't think that would work very well. I'm not sure you're going to be successful with that one.
Eggs?
False. They're not. They're a natural product and they're not ultra-processed.
The process of the chicken laying the egg is not processing.
No, that is not processing. That is a natural occurrence.
I'm a big fan of crisps, Annabelle. How ultra-processed are they?
I'm sorry, it's very confusing because the true is green and I associate green with good, but no, sorry, crisps are quite bad for you. We all love them, but they're very ultra-processed.
Yeah, they're my guilty pleasure. And there are actually 2 more categories. It's not a simple game of processed or not, is it?
No, and I think that's what can be quite confusing. So you've got unprocessed, which are things, unprocessed, minimally processed. That's things like, as we just said, the eggs, fruit, vegetables, milk and meat, most meats. And then you've got some processed ingredients. So that's things like oils and butter, because again, they're just not naturally occurring. There is a kind of minimal processing to get them into the forms that they are. And then we have processed foods such as cooked meats and some bread. But confusingly, some bread is actually ultra-processed as well. And these are all defined under the NOVA classification system.
So it depends where you get your bread from.
Depends
and
where
how
you get
it's made.
Exactly, yeah. So if you're buying a long shelf life bread that could, mysteriously stay in the back of your cupboard for a few weeks and not go mouldy, that's ultra processed. Whereas if you're thinking, fresh bread from a bakery or a bakery section in the supermarket, that's more likely to have been made there and then on the day with minimal ingredients.
Annabelle, I mentioned that half of our diets in the UK and the US are made up of ultra processed foods, and I was actually quite surprised by that. It feels like a lot, and it made me think about my own eating habits and what I've got in my fridge. And I wanted to ask you how that compares to other parts of the world.
Yeah, so the best figures we have are from 2022. You look at countries like Colombia and Brazil, only a fifth of their diets are made up of ultra-processed foods. So that would be daily, they base that on daily calorie intake. And then places where it's growing quite significantly. You've got South Korea, Japan, Brazil and Chile. They say it's around a fifth to a third of the daily calorie intake is from ultra-processed foods. And one of the ones that surprised me most was Italy. It's where it's only around 14%. So you think of that Mediterranean diet, why would you want to go for something ultra-processed?
You don't need it with those tomatoes, do you?
Exactly.
So, Annabelle, we haven't always had or eaten this much ultra-processed food. What has changed? Why are we eating so much of it now?
So life has just become a lot busier for some people. The working day has become longer. So people are just choosing ultra-processed foods. Then in some countries, you look at fresh produce, it can be really expensive. So, marry that with the convenience of just being able to grab something quick and tasty. That is really attractive to people. And you also have to think about the way that these foods are marketed too. I know you like your crisps. So you look on a supermarket shelf, they're in bright packaging. It's very attractive. They're often high up on the shelves as well.
And there's so many good flavours.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. You think about how long a packet of crisps can last if you just chuck it in your cupboard and you can go and grab it, in a few weeks or a few months. Whereas fresh food does go off quickly.
Yeah.
You have to consume it in a couple of days. So I do think convenience, it is the main issue there. And again, with a ready meal, you put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes, it's done, it's hot, it's served to you. Whereas, sometimes cooking a fresh meal from scratch, that can take a really long time.
What's your ultra-processed guilty food?
Oh, I'm a chocolate girl.
Yeah.
I really am. Like, I could probably never eat a crisp ever again. I know that sounds crazy.
You're more
but
sweet.
Packet of biscuits, something like that. Yeah. A cake. That is that's my guilty pleasure.
We're going to have to get cooking and baking, aren't we? Homemade
Exactly.
crisps can't be that hard. So in terms of health, what does the science actually say about ultra-processed foods? And, people say they're bad for us, but do we know how bad?
So there's actually been a recent study from a well-respected medical journal called The Lancet, and they say at the moment there aren't enough big clinical trials to really determine how much these ultra-processed foods are damaging health. But they're saying it shouldn't stop governments from taking action because we know that these foods contain, a lot of unhealthy ingredients. These convenience meals, they often have a lot of salt in them, a lot of sugar, saturated fats. And we know, there's enough research to tell us that those things are bad for our diets. The other issue that they've also uncovered is that because people consume ultra-processed foods as part of an perhaps unhealthy lifestyle, it is quite hard to determine how much those foods are making up, perhaps early death and other diseases when you consider those other factors. We just don't know whether they're engaging in other unhealthy practices at the same
time. Smoking or not doing exercise.
Exactly.
So ultra-processed foods could be part of an indicator of a more unhealthy lifestyle.
Precisely. But what they do say is that when it comes to a healthy diet, moderation is the key. You can have ultra-processed foods in your diet, but you have to find some level of balance.
And we wanted to find out what the impact of these kind of foods is on our body. So we have been speaking to a health expert.
I'm Priscila Machado. I am a nutritionist, and my research focuses on ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods make people overeat. In one of the most controlled experiments we have, people in the ultra-processed food diet, they eat around 500 calories extra a day when in comparison to those people that eat a non-ultra-processed food diet. And these people they ate faster, they felt less full, and kept snacking because ultra-processed foods are very tasty and quite soft in their texture. Some studies suggest that ultra-processed foods can affect hormones that control our sense of fullness. So even when you have eaten enough, your brain may not get the message as clearly. Ultra-processed foods often contain additives such as emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners that have been linked to negative impacts in our gut microbiome and also increasing inflammation. And our gut, it plays such a huge role in keeping our body healthy, boosting our immunity and our mood. Ultra-processed foods also often have high amounts of ingredients that are not very good in high amounts for us, such as sugar, salt, and fat. And there's also the role of packaging. Ultra-processed foods, they come wrapped in layers and layers of plastic packaging. And chemicals such as bisphenol can migrate into the food, and those can mess up with our hormones. Finally, the more ultra-processed foods we eat, the less room there is for the good stuff. Things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and fresh made meals. And we ended up losing all the benefits that these foods give us.
And they've also been linked to all these different health conditions I was reading about. Things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, heart conditions.
Yeah, so what we do know from really recent findings is that ultra-processed foods in the UK and the US are being linked to around 14% of early deaths. And when you compare those figures with countries with lower daily calorie consumption of ultra-processed foods, places like Colombia and Brazil, that's linked to 4% of premature deaths. So it is fairly easy to compare, but as scientists say, more research needs to be done to look at the really long-term health effects of consuming ultra-processed foods, especially as you need to consider that they are becoming an increasing part of our lives, but they haven't, we haven't got that long-term research to show what years and years of consumption looks like on the body.
So given this review, this research that's come out and what we know about what is in them from looking at the packets, are there any governments that are regulating how people eat ultra-processed foods?
Yeah, so some of the big ones are in Chile, Mexico and Uruguay, where consumers are already told when they visit a store or supermarket, this food is ultra-processed, there's specific labels.
They're these bright coloured ones. I've actually seen them in Brazil.
And in Canada, that same law is coming in next year. So they're looking at that model and it's going to be something very similar. Then in Chile and the UK, there's a sugar tax in both those countries. So that mostly applies to fizzy drinks, and that's a way to encourage manufacturers to produce less sugary products because then the tax on those items is less. And then again in the UK and South Korea, there's a marketing ban on ultra-processed foods that target children. So I'm sure you've noticed from advertising that those foods are not being advertised to children anymore, which is a big positive.
I was wondering if you've got any advice, or if there's any advice out there. Is it okay for me to have a packet of crisps once in a while? Should we be cutting ultra-processed foods out of our diets completely, or is there a way for us to still enjoy them from time to time?
I think the best thing to do is just not to panic. Okay. You can't... If ultra-processed foods are a big part of your life, then you're not just going to wake up one morning and completely overhaul your diet. Everything is fine in moderation. I would just say, try and think about when you are going to the supermarket and you're going to do your weekly shop, have a look at some of the ingredients of the things that you're buying regularly, and do just check. It's that 5-ingredient rule. See if it's got more than 5 and see if you recognise the ingredients that are in those foods, and whether if you were to go home and try and replicate that meal at home, whether you could. And if you can't, it's probably a good indication that this isn't something you should be consuming regularly. We're all human. We want to enjoy a packet of crisps now and again. So don't beat yourself up about it too much, is what I would say.
I'm going to try and make homemade crisps. And I do find when I try and replicate these kind of recipes, then you see how much sugar and salt and fat actually goes into them. And that can be a very good deterrent next time you want to get it from the supermarket shelf. Annabelle, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that is it from us today. But if you enjoyed this episode, there are plenty more right here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel. And while you're here, like, share, subscribe and comment below to tell us your thoughts. How much ultra-processed food do you eat, and do you feel bad about it, or do you just enjoy it from time to time? I'm Hannah. This is What in the World from the BBC World Service, and we'll see you next time.